Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, June 13th, 2023. Donald Trump is arrested, booked, and fingerprinted and pleads not guilty in a federal courtroom in Miami to criminal charges stemming from his alleged mishandling of national security documents and obstruction of justice as the federal government tried to get the documents back. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy reaching an agreement with a band of House Republicans who had been blocking bills from coming to the House floor for debate and vote. How long will the truce last, and what does it mean for the agenda for the rest of the year, especially regarding spending bills? We'll talk about it with Emily Brooks, House reporter with The Hill. President Joe Biden meets at the White House with the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg to talk about the war in Ukraine and next month's NATO summit. President Biden also talking about what caused this meeting to be delayed for a day, his getting a root canal. The Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen testifies before the House Financial Services Committee and is asked whether the U.S. government will review the proposed merger between the PGA Tour and LIV Golf. LIV Golf financed by the government of Saudi Arabia and reviewed for any U.S. national security concerns. And the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky defends the Biden administration's response to the COVID-19 pandemic before the House Coronavirus Subcommittee. And defending it for a final time, she'll be leaving her post at the end of the month. Reporting from CNN, former President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to 37 charges related to alleged mishandling of classified documents. Donald Trump's lawyers asked for a jury trial during the former president's arraignment Tuesday at a federal courthouse in Miami. Todd Blanche, an attorney for Donald Trump, telling the judge, "We most certainly enter a plea of not guilty." During the hearing, Donald Trump sat hunched over with his arms crossed and a scowl on his face. He did not speak. Donald Trump's aide and co-defendant Walt Nauta also arrested, fingerprinted, and processed. He had an initial appearance Tuesday, but will not be arraigned until June 27th. Magistrate Judge Jonathan Goodman ruled that Donald Trump could not communicate with Walt Nauta about the case. Judge also told prosecutors to make a list of potential witnesses that Donald Trump can't communicate with about the case except through counsel. And before the arraignment hearing, deputy marshals booked the president, former president, and took electronic copies of his fingerprints. They did not take a mugshot of Donald Trump since he is easily recognizable. The booking process took about 10 minutes. Reporting from CNN. Outside the courthouse, Donald Trump's spokesperson, Alina Habba, made a statement.
Today is not about President Donald J. Trump, who is defiant. It is not about the Republican Party. It is not about the 2024 election. It is about the destruction of the long-standing American principles that have set this country apart for so long. In recent years, we have seen the rise of politically motivated prosecutors who don't care for impartiality, who don't care for due process or equal protection of laws. They have been quietly but aggressively cultivating a two-tiered system of justice where selective treatment is the norm. From the Russia hoax to the attorney generals to the corrupt DAs in Georgia and New York, and now this. The people in charge of this country do not love America. They hate Donald Trump. What we are witnessing today is the blatant and unapologetic weaponization of the criminal justice system. The Biden-appointed special counsel has sought fit to bring 37 federal charges against President Trump, the leading frontrunner, less than a year and a half before an election. Countless other individuals, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden himself, retained possession of classified documents, yet have not been prosecuted. And none of them came into possession of those documents while they were president. None of them were president who, as the head and sole member of the executive branch, has the power to summarily declassify documents. The decision to pursue charges against President Trump while turning a blind eye to others is emblematic of the corruption that we have here. We are at a turning point in our nation's history. The targeting, prosecution of a leading political opponent is the type of thing you see in dictatorships like Cuba and Venezuela. It is commonplace there for rival candidates to be prosecuted, persecuted, and put into jail. What is being done to the President Trump should terrify all citizens of this country. These are not the ideals that our democracy is founded upon. And this is not our America. Thank you.
So what's happening right now inside the courthouse? Has he been arrested? Has he been fingerprinted? Has a mugshot been taken? Walk us through what's happening here now.
President Trump is in a very unique position where he doesn't need to be given a mugshot, obviously. He is not a flight risk. He is the leading candidate of the GOP at the moment. He is going through a process that has been coordinated with Secret Service, and it will all be handled seamlessly.
And thank you, guys. The attorneys, what is his state of mind? Just real quick, how is he feeling?
He's defiant.
Alina Habba, spokesperson for former President Donald Trump, outside the federal courthouse in Miami, while inside, the president and his lawyers pleading not guilty to all 37 federal charges related to the mishandling of the classified documents found at his home in Mar-a-Lago and also obstruction of justice. Number of Trump supporters coming to the courthouse by bus. AP says that it raised concerns for law enforcement officials preparing for possible unrest around the courthouse. The Miami Police Chief Manuel Morales said downtown could see anywhere from a few thousand up to 50,000 protests. Sofia Carolina Hernandez is a reporter with Scripps News. She talked about what she saw with the protests outside.
I would just say that right now it's really just been an ebb and flow all day. We have seen crowds grow throughout the afternoon. I'd say from this morning they have tripled in size. A lot of supporters, a lot of protesters, a lot of media crews as well, and the general public. I'd say if we were to just count the supporters and protesters, we're talking hundreds. But if you factor in, again, the media crews, the general public, the roads close to this area, again, we're in downtown Miami. They are open except for 3rd through 5th Street. So the general public is allowed to come to this area, so then we're talking thousands. So what I will say, what's different today compared to other events is really the energy. The energy today just has been higher. You could probably faintly hear some of the chanting. We've really been hearing on and off throughout the entire day. Cars that pass by, trucks that pass by, they have been honking their horns, making their voices known. We've seen posters, we've seen costumes, we've seen music even. So really the energy has just been at an all-time high. And I think there was one individual who said it best to me today. He said that obviously his political views is what drove him to come out here today to show his support for the president, but that really he just wants to take part of this historic day. And when I spoke to various individuals here on the ground, they kind of just said that they want to be able to exercise their First Amendment rights, have their voices be heard, and really just take part and witness history unfold.
Sofia Carolina Hernandez is a reporter with Scripps News outside the courthouse in Miami. More from the AP story. Hundreds of journalists from around the world were also on hand at the courthouse, as were anti-Trump protesters. Among the crowd, some waved signs and flags, with the two factions at times shouting over one another. Journalists from China, the United Kingdom, Australia, France, Luxembourg, New Zealand, Germany, and Switzerland were among the hundreds of reporters who've converged on the courthouse, some having spent several days camped outside in the muggy heat. That reporting from AP. After the arraignment, Donald Trump stopped by the famous Versailles Cuban restaurant in Miami's Little Havana neighborhood to meet supporters and be interviewed by a YouTube star. The supporters there wished him a happy birthday.
Some birthday. We got a government that's out of control.
Today is Donald Trump's 77th birthday, and to the crowd there at the Versailles restaurant in Little Havana in Miami, he again proclaimed his innocence.
We love the people, and you see where they are. You see the crowds and everything else. We have a country that is in decline like never before, and we can't let it happen. I'm going to make a little speech tonight in Bedminster, and I hope you're going to be there. Can you start tomorrow? I hope you're going to be there. You can come too if you want, okay? Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Donald Trump at the restaurant in Miami. He'll be flying back to his golf course in Bedminster, New Jersey. The speech scheduled for 8:15 p.m. Eastern. It'll be live on C-SPAN Radio and C-SPAN Television. While that was all happening in Florida, back in Washington, members of Congress continuing to react to the indictment of Donald Trump and today's arraignment on those federal charges. Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, chair of the Democratic caucus in the House, expressing disbelief that Republicans would continue to support Donald Trump.
What is your reaction to the Trump arraignment today, and what is your reaction to Chairman Jordan not ruling out having Jack Smith testify before Congress?
Look, there's, I think that, what I'm concerned about are, there are over 50 House Republicans who have endorsed Donald Trump for president, and their posture is troubling. It's deeply troubling to read tweets like Clay Higgins, which basically tells folks to stand back and stand by. For those of us who were in the chamber on January 6th, we view this as from a very dangerous perspective. But there is a rule of law. The president will be held to that standard. The former president will be held to that standard. There is a process for this. He will be treated like any other defendant and given his opportunity to make his case in court. But the allegations are incredibly troubling. And the fact that House Republicans continue to try to come to his rescue just blows our mind, quite honestly. And it stems from the fact that this is the leader of their party. They, lock, stock, and barrel, will follow what the former president says. And so if he says something is wrong, if he says something is corrupt, they believe it. And they're willing to use every tool imaginable in order to change the game in their favor. We've seen it before, and we'll see it again. So it's troubling in the sense that this is what happens when they have power. Can you imagine what would happen if they had power of the presidency and of Congress? This is who they are.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, chair of the House Democratic caucus, at a news conference today. He referenced Congressman Clay Higgins' tweet. Clay Higgins is a Republican from Louisiana, and the tweet reads, "This is a perimeter probe from the oppressors. Hold. Our POTUS has this. Buckle up. 1/50K, know your bridges. Rock steady calm. That is all." That tweet from Congressman Higgins. On the Republican side, reacting to the indictment and arraignment today of former President Donald Trump, the Majority Leader of the House, Steve Scalise, from Louisiana as well, at a separate news conference, asked about the indictment, and he compared it to the allegations against Democratic politicians.
On the substance of the indictment, back to that, understanding that you guys have your own investigations underway, ongoing, and you're talking about a double standard that you see, how do you answer people who say, there's a double standard going back at you, that these are clearly big national security documents that doesn't matter if it's a president or anybody, put at risk, is what DOJ is saying. How do you respond, and how do you see that? Do you not see a risk there?
Well, ultimately, look, this is in the courts, but also look at some of the photos that were being sensationally shown over the weekend. There was a box that was shown with all these documents spewed out. And as people looked at those documents, it turned out it wasn't anything classified. It was newspaper clippings and some personal items presented to try to give the impression that there's all these classified documents just laying around on the floor. And yet you contrast that with Joe Biden's garage, where there were classified documents going back to when he was a United States senator, not even a president. You know, and which act governs a president? Is it the Presidential Records Act? Now they seem to be using the Espionage Act just specifically after Trump. Again, is justice being carried out fairly is the question. When you see some of those pictures and go, wait a minute, these are clippings and they're trying to present it as classified documents. People are looking at that wondering. Yeah.
Point you are referring to what you call a two-tier justice system. So just your perspective, how do you think this could be rectified? Do you think the answer is to drop Trump's case? Is it to hold Hillary Clinton and Biden accountable? What do you think should happen in the
Well, I think if you saw the Justice Department and other agencies carrying out the law equally, when you see some of these charges, again, audio recordings, this was from years ago with Burisma, and when they say paid Biden, the first question that's going to be asked, which Biden? Multiple Bidens. Jamie Comer's committee has shown we're getting millions of dollars from shell corporations. Again, where's that public raid? Did you see a raid on Joe Biden's garage? Did you see a raid on Hillary's server? She wasn't president of the United States, and she had classified documents on a server that she destroyed, almost kind of jokes about it now because she knows that she's going to be treated differently. That the different treatment is what angers people.
The House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, at a news conference today with other House Republican leaders. Over on the Senate side, the Republican leader there, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, has not said much of anything about the indictment and today's arraignment of Donald Trump. Reporters tried today.
Do you have a reaction to the indictment as we've seen so far of the former president, and did he do something wrong in your view?
Look, I simply, as I said earlier, am not going to start commenting on the various candidates we have running for president. There are a lot of them. It's going to be interesting to watch, and I'll look forward to seeing your coverage.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, at a news conference. Senator J.D. Vance, Republican from Ohio, announcing today that he'll be blocking all of President Biden's nominees to the Department of Justice to protest the federal indictment of former President Donald Trump. Senator Vance saying in a statement, Donald Trump is merely the latest victim of a Department of Justice that cares more about politics than law enforcement. Congressman Ken Buck, Republican from Colorado, telling CNN, though, if he, Donald Trump, is convicted of these charges of mishandling this information, of knowingly concealing his actions, I certainly won't support a convicted felon for the White House. This is Washington Today. Story at USA Today, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre violated the Federal Hatch Act during the lead-up to the 2022 midterm elections when she repeatedly warned of, quote, mega MAGA Republicans, according to a government watchdog agency. The U.S. Office of Special Counsel found that Karine Jean-Pierre's use of the phrase during press briefings last year violated the Hatch Act, which prohibits federal employees from using their title to engage in political activity to interfere with the results of an election. That's reporting from USA Today. The press secretary was asked about it today at her briefing at the White House.
The Office of Special Counsel has said that your use of MAGA Republicans violated the Hatch Act. What kind of guidance had you previously been given by the White House counsel on that matter?
So let me just lay this down. I'm really glad that you asked the question. I know there's been many news reports on this. So as we've made very clear throughout our time in this administration, that we do everything that we can to uphold certainly the Hatch Act and take the law very seriously. A couple of things that I want to lay out here. So with, many of you have mentioned with friendly consternation how often we take the Hatch Act, we follow the Hatch Act throughout these past 2 years. We received a letter from the Office of Special Counsel, which is the independent agency that enforces the Hatch Act, as all of you know, and it communicated it to us that their opinion and issuing a warning, but not taking further action, as you all know by reading the letter and the reports. The White House counsel's office is reviewing their opinion and is going to respond to them, so certainly not going to get ahead of how the White House counsel is going to respond or what's going to come out from that action. So now if you look at the archived Trump White House website, it contains about nearly 2,000 uses of MAGA to describe policies and official agendas. Congressional Republicans have also used MAGA to refer to policies and official agenda frequently for years now, even clearly before we entered the administration. And what's more, I also want to note that the opinion that you see that was presented by OSC happened just last week, which is it occurred months after the briefing where I made those comments. So basically, it is retroactive, right? The actions were retroactive after I had made the comments. So look, when basically what we're seeing by me laying that out is that we did not know their opinion when we were able to use when we were given the green light to actually say the comments that I made. So just want to make that very clear. But again, look, it's going to be reviewed. That's what the White House counsel is going to do. They're going to have a dialogue, a routine dialogue with OSC, and so I'll just leave it there.
The White House Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, with reporters in the White House briefing room. Back to Capitol Hill and in the House of Representatives, this from Reuters. U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy reached an agreement on Monday with an insurgent group of Republican conservative hardliners that will allow legislation to move forward this week following a standoff that had paralyzed the chamber for days. But the lawmakers, including members of the ultra-conservative House Freedom Caucus, warned that they could block other measures in the House unless they see progress toward a power-sharing deal with Speaker McCarthy that would bolster their influence, particularly over spending. That was from Reuters. Today, on the House floor, a resolution governing rules for debate on 4 different bills, which had failed last week, that rule had failed, with a dozen Republicans voting no, passed. And this new rule had one addition. It set up debate on a 5th bill, which the House Freedom Caucus wanted, a bill to overturn the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives regulation dealing with pistol braces. Congressman Thomas Massie, Republican from Kentucky, a member of the Rules Committee, led off the floor debate.
These are 5 bills that may seem unrelated, but they're very related, and they have to do with the power of Congress and the fact that our power has atrophied considerably since the beginning of this country. In fact, we're almost a vestigial organ of this republic at this point. Our power, we've ceded so much power to the executive branch, and that's how all of these bills are related. 3 of the bills seek to repeal laws or regulations that the administrative branch is unconstitutionally, I would argue, promulgating. And 2 of these bills get at the heart of the matter, the problem that we have. And one of them specifically is the REINS Act, which is very important. This would rein in our power to legislate. I don't think our founders would recognize our form of government at this point. They never intended for the administrators to be the lawmakers, yet here we are. So the Regulation in Need of Scrutiny Act would take every major regulation that's suggested, and I say suggested, by the administration back to Congress, where there would have to be a positive vote of the House and the Senate in order for that to go to the president, and then with his signature become law, as all laws should do. And then the other bill in this package that seeks to address the sort of chronic problem that we have here in Congress is the Separation of Powers Restoration Act. It's basically a repeal of a horrible Supreme Court precedent called Chevron deference that says that basically any way the administration wants to construe one of our laws, they can get away with it, and the Supreme Court will give deference to the interpretation, no matter how far afield from the original interpretation of the law there was given from Congress. Finally, the 3 bills that deal with the 3 bills today that deal with individual regulations. 2 of them deal with gas stoves. This administration has a war on gas stoves. Depending on which person from the administration you listen to, the rule that's being promulgated by the Consumer Safety Product Group and also by the Department of Energy, there are 2 rules here, they would ban between 95 to 50% of the gas stoves on the market for arbitrary reasons. And it's not clear that there would be any consumer benefit from banning these. In fact, consumers would suffer from this ban. These are the types of rules that we need the REINS Act for. They would have significant impact on our economy, and that's why they should be here in front of Congress, and that's why we're seeking to countermand them here today. And then finally, and I think this is the most important rule that we are countermanding in legislation this week, and that is the pistol brace rule from the ATF. You know, we're not talking about an interpretation of a law where the EPA says, you know, we think we should allow this much sulfur dioxide instead of that amount of sulfur dioxide and create a civil infraction where corporations could be sued or punished. We're talking about criminal penalties. The ATF has twisted existing statute, a law that was passed by Congress in 1934. Now they've magically reinterpreted it to create tens of millions of felons beginning on June 1st. So we've got a bad situation in this country right now where millions of people have been turned into felons, law-abiding individuals who are following the rules that were set forth by the ATF. And that's why urgent action is required on the pistol brace rule repeal here today. And that's House Joint Resolution 44.
Congressman Thomas Massie, Republican from Kentucky, a member of the Rules Committee, today on the House floor considering the rules for debate for 5 different bills. Congressman James McGovern, Democrat from Massachusetts, is the ranking member of the Rules Committee. He also spoke on the floor today.
We haven't had votes in, 5 legislative days, all because some Republican members decided to throw a temper tantrum last week on the House floor, wanting to rehash legislation that was passed the week before. So what we saw was essentially a fight between the right wing and the extreme right wing. I mean, what the hell is going on here? With each passing week, it becomes more and more obvious that the Republican Party is completely out of touch with what everyday people care about in this country. We're bringing a new rule to the floor that incorporates the bills that we were supposed to do last week and adds an additional bill to make it easier to kill people. I'm told that the Republicans now have the votes to pass this rule, but the question is, what was the deal? Or better yet, what was the secret deal to convince the Republicans who were problematic last week to get along this week? Reading the press, we see that members of the Freedom Caucus are saying they have this deal on power sharing. I'm not quite sure what that means, and power sharing with the Speaker and the extreme right wing. Is that the deal? And then we hear from the Speaker that there's no deal on anything. So I don't know what the truth is, and maybe my friend can enlighten us at some point what the truth is. But my Republicans friends like to say that this place should be run like a business. Well, if they really believe that, then this place should be out of business, because this is not the way Congress should be run. This is not the way you run a democracy. This is ridiculous. You know, Democrats have worked tirelessly to try to lower costs for people, bring jobs back from China, rebuild our country, fight pollution, and keep our community safe. And Republicans, what do they stand for? Well, forgive me if I say I'm not entirely sure, because right now the only thing I have seen so far since they took over is dysfunction and disarray.
Congressman James McGovern, Democrat from Massachusetts, ranking member on the Rules Committee, today on the House floor. The House went on to pass this rule to set up debate on the 5 bills. The vote was 218 to 209, party line. Republicans voting yes, Democrats voting no. The infighting among House Republicans reportedly got very heated during their closed-door meeting today, with the rebel conservative bloc being taken to task by a moderate faction. We'll get more on this in just a moment with a reporter. After the House Republican conference members met privately, the leadership held a news conference. The House Majority Whip, Tom Emmer, Republican from Minnesota, spoke about the inner dynamics of the party.
Teams aren't built on the first day of practice, which, by the way, I have to comment on this wonderful man up here with the Golden Knights hat in honor of the fact that the holy grail of God's sport will be on the line tonight. Again, teams aren't built on the first day of practice. Our Republican House majority has worked hard over the last 5 months to become a great team, and we've had a lot of success. As with every team, the Republican House majority has had to learn how to work together to build that success. And as with every team, you win some games and you lose some every now and then too. But you always come out stronger, and that's exactly what we've done. First big test after first big test, House Republicans have continued to defy expectations and to deliver big wins for the American people. It started with the Speaker's fight in January. It continued with H.R. 1, the Lower Energy Costs Act, H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act, and our latest debt ceiling package, the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Of course, there will be days where we fight it out for the best possible outcome. But that's the beauty of having a diverse conference made up of 222 members with different ideas and different perspectives. Ultimately, we always rally together around what's best for the American people and the greatest country on the face of the planet. I'm proud of what we've accomplished so far, and I look forward to what we're going to accomplish going forward. Now, let's go have another full week of wins for the American people.
Congressman Tom Emmer, Republican from Minnesota, the majority whip at a news conference. Emily Brooks, House reporter for The Hill, has been following the House Republicans meeting today and their negotiations, joining us now by phone. Thank you for being with us. So House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and the conservative group who had brought the House floor to a standstill over the weekend, now reportedly at a compromise. What do we know about what they agreed to?
Well, we don't have all of the details yet, and this is sort of a tentative compromise according to those hardline conservative members who did hold up that floor action for the last week. But they are willing to let floor action continue as they discuss more. And this very much has to do with top-line spending levels. The conservative Republicans were not thrilled and very unhappy with the spending caps that Speaker McCarthy negotiated in the debt limit bill, and they were hoping it would be deeper cuts. They accused him of using budget gimmicks with rescissions in order to get down to fiscal year 2022 numbers. And so now there has been a little bit of a change there. Speaker McCarthy and House Appropriations Chairwoman Kay Granger have both said that these cap levels are not the floor for what they are looking at, and that any appropriations as the appropriators move through the process can be lower, and they will shoot for lower as they move forward with this. So that is a very major part of this.
The House Republicans had their usual closed-door meeting this morning, and reports coming out of it that the Republican moderates are not happy with what's transpired over the past week.
Absolutely. One lawmaker told me and my colleagues, speaking anonymously in order to candidly talk about this meeting, that it got a little bit spicy. And another lawmaker said that Representative Derek Van Orden of Wisconsin dropped an F-bomb when he stood up at the mics and was expressing frustration with how the last week has gone. There are several members, including Representative Mike Lawler of New York, who are also speaking in frustration about this small group of members of the House Freedom Caucus and their allies who were able to hold up this floor action and are working on this separate deal with Speaker McCarthy. Of course, Speaker McCarthy is characterizing this more as a continuation of discussion, hearing out the concerns that members have, the same that he would do with any member from any part of different factions of the conference.
We're talking with Emily Brooks from The Hill. The phrase power sharing arrangement has been thrown around the past day or two, although I guess now the Republicans, both the Freedom Caucus Republicans and Speaker McCarthy, saying, no, that's not really how we want to describe this. What have you heard?
Well, that was a description that Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida gave yesterday, coming out of a long meeting with other Republicans who had held up that floor action, saying that they are renegotiating the power sharing agreement that was negotiated in January during the speaker's race, which had a lot of details about how House rules would work, different priorities, spending targets, things like that. So Speaker McCarthy is saying that, no, this is not a new power-sharing agreement that we've come to. He's saying that, look, if I had a separate agreement with every small group in the House that could potentially hold up floor action, I would have millions of different agreements. And so he's really downplaying that. He's really trying to not get back into that sort of narrative from the speaker's race that there was some kind of secret side deal for him in order to be speaker. He is very much expressing this as the normal course of action in a House with a slim majority where the power is more bottom up. Of course, there have been some changes that we have noticed as these meetings have progressed. For example, coming to the floor, is a piece of legislation that these conservative members wanted to see that would repeal an ATF rule about pistol braces that they were hoping to see come to the floor, and that is a change from last week as well.
And finally, what does all this mean for Kevin McCarthy's speakership as we move forward?
Well, throughout all of this, and even throughout all of the frustration from these conservative members about the debt bill in general, there has been one member, Representative Dan Bishop, who brought up a motion to vacate, saying that perhaps somebody should call for a motion to force a vote on ousting Speaker McCarthy from his speaker position. But that really has not caught on in any widespread way. Even other members of the House Freedom Caucus say that they are not talking about this. They're really, willing to work with the speaker at this point and continue going through this. And, Speaker McCarthy is always spinning this into that he is being underestimated. He will continue to be underestimated and will continue to try and prove the political commentators and observers wrong. But the fact is that the floor action was halted for basically an entire week on the House floor. So even though they did not oust him from his speakership, they did have him lose control of the floor, and that is never good news if you're the Speaker of the House.
Emily Brooks, House reporter for The Hill. Find her stories at thehill.com, and on Twitter it's at Emily Brooks News. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Washington Today continues in a moment.
Live Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio. At 10 a.m. Eastern, the head of the Federal Highway Administration, Shailen Bhatt, testifies before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Then at 2:30 p.m., Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell holds a news conference. He's expected to talk about monetary policy, inflation, and whether there will be a change in interest rates. It's all live Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio. Listen on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app or ask your smart speaker to play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. President Biden met with the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg in the White House Oval Office today. It was a meeting that was postponed from Monday after the president had a root canal dental procedure. The president spoke about that, as well as Ukraine's counteroffensive in its war with invading Russian forces and next month's annual NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, and Secretary General Stoltenberg's pending retirement at the end of September. He has led the 31-member military alliance since 2014 and had his term extended 3 times. Here's President Biden.
Well, Mr. Secretary General, it's great to have you here. It's good to see you again. And I apologize for having to reschedule yesterday. I had a lot of fun yesterday afternoon. I had a little toothache problem I took care of. And thank you for accommodating me. And your leadership of the Alliance has been through a really significant period in terms of dealing with NATO's relationship with Ukraine. And, I think you've done an incredible job. You saw each other last in Warsaw, and I think you said it, and I agree. NATO allies have never been more united. We both worked like hell to make sure that happened. And so far, so good. And I think it's and we see our joint strength in modernizing the relationship within NATO, as well as providing assistance to defense capabilities to Ukraine. And we see it in Finland's recent accession to NATO. I remember you and I talking, and I think I said to you, I know I said to others, that Putin was making a mistake. He was looking for the Finlandization of NATO. He got the NATOization of Finland, and hopefully Sweden very shortly. And your friendship and leadership has been a great deal. We're strengthened. We've strengthened NATO's eastern flank, made it clear that we'll defend every inch of NATO territory. And I say it again: the commitment of the United States to NATO's Article 5 is rock solid. And our summit in Lithuania next month, we're going to be building on that momentum from working to ensure that allies spend enough on defense, the 2%. Not just as a hype, but that's the bottom line. And NATO's engagement as well. As you know, I've kept you completely informed of my discussions with Japan and South Korea and the Pacific. I think it's the first time ever we've had a major Pacific power engaged in dealing with aggression in Europe. And so I want to thank you again, Secretary General, for your partnership, your friendship, and most importantly, your leadership in NATO.
President Biden, dear Joe, thank you so much for the warm words, and thank you for taking the time to meet me once again here at the White House. It's really a great honor and pleasure to meet you. But most of all, thank you for your leadership, for your strong personal commitment to the transatlantic bond, to Europe and North America standing together. And let me also thank the US Congress and the people of America for the strong support to Ukraine. And you just made a new announcement of additional US support, and that is something which is very much welcomed. European allies and Canada are also doing their part with tens of billions in military and economic support for Ukraine. And the support that we are providing together to Ukraine is now making a difference on the battlefield as we speak. Because the offensive is launched and Ukrainians are making progress, making advances. It's still early days, but what we do know is that the more land Ukrainians are able to liberate, the stronger hand they will have at the negotiating table, and also the more likely it will be that President Putin at some stage will understand that he will never win this war of aggression on the battlefield. Then I think we also have to realize that Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine was not only an attack on Ukraine, but also on our core values and on free people everywhere. And therefore, President Putin must not win this war, because that will not only be a tragedy for Ukrainians, but also make the world more dangerous. It will send a message to authoritarian leaders all over the world, also in China, that when they use military force, they get what they want. And we will then become more vulnerable. So it's our security interest to support Ukraine. And that's exactly what we'll do when we meet all the NATO leaders at the summit in Vilnius next month, where we will agree to sustain and step up our support to Ukraine, further strengthen our deterrence and defense, including by a new commitment to invest more in defense. And I expect allies to agree that 2% of GDP for defense has to be a minimum of what allies have to invest in our shared security. We'll strengthen our partnership with our Indo-Pacific partners, and then of course we all look forward to welcoming Sweden as a full-fledged member of the alliance as soon as possible. So once again, Mr. President, thank you for your leadership, thank you for your strong commitment, and I look forward to welcome you at the NATO summit in Vilnius.
Well, no small part because of your leadership. We've got, beyond NATO, we've got another 30-some, well, a total of 40 nations that are committed to the independence of Ukraine. And I think it's a real clear message. So, God willing, we're going to be able to keep this unity up, and thank you for your leadership.
President, have you discussed...
Thank you, Mr. President. Have you read the Trump indictment?
Ukrainian offensive. Everyone, thank you very much. Everyone, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone.
In the White House Oval Office, President Joe Biden and visiting NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. From CNN, Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced a new $325 million security assistance package for Ukraine on Tuesday. It's the 40th presidential drawdown, includes, according to the Secretary, critical air defense capabilities, additional munitions for high-mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS, artillery rounds, anti-tank weapons, armored vehicles, and other equipment essential to strengthening Ukraine's forces on the battlefield. The Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says that she cannot say, because of privacy rules, whether the proposed PGA Tour and LIV Golf merger will be reviewed by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS, which looks at national security implications of foreign investment. LIV Golf is supported by the Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund. Secretary Yellen was questioned about it today by Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, at a Financial Services Committee hearing.
Let me just turn to something that
is a recent announcement, that is by the PGA, that the PGA Tour may be purchased by LIV Golf, which is owned and controlled by Saudi officials, including the Saudi Crown Prince. As chair of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS, you know that in assisting the President in overseeing the national security risk of foreign direct investments in the U.S. economy, the committee is permitted to consider, quote, whether any foreign person engaging in a covered transaction with a United States business has a history of complying with United States laws and regulations. Well, that's a quote. I believe that this consideration is a substantially lower bar than the serious crimes committed by the Saudi Arabian government and its officials. Saudi Arabia has a repressive government known for chilling, jailing dissidents, and enacting draconian punishments. The Crown Prince himself has been implicated by our own intelligence community in the brutal kidnapping, torture, murder, and dismemberment of an American resident. Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, further, as shared by 9/11 Families United, the families of the victims of the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, in response to the news of the merger. The kingdom spent their billions of dollars before 9/11 to fund terrorism, spread their vitriolic hatred of Americans, and finance Al-Qaeda and the murder of our loved ones. These same 9/11 families are still waiting for justice in their lawsuit against the Saudis, as the Saudi government obstructs court processes and obscures the truth, dragging out the family's suffering and restitution for over 2 decades. Can you share what scrutiny this particular deal between LIV Golf and PGA Tour may receive? Is CFIUS looking into their investments by the Saudi sovereign wealth fund in general, given its historic and continued failure to comply with U.S. law and regulation?
So what I can say is that CFIUS is a very important part of Treasury's national security mission, and the committee is very well positioned to review transactions that do involve national security concerns. Regrettably, because there are very strict rules of confidentiality, I'm not in a position to be able to comment on any specific matter or potential case, but certainly where there are national security concerns, CFIUS is in a position and does review transactions.
Thank you for that clarification. In essence, what I've heard is you cannot comment on what is going on now, but there's a possibility because they have the responsibility to review these kinds of transactions.
That's correct.
To determine whether or not it's in our best interest or our security is somehow compromised because of the transaction. And I thank you for that, because I do believe that and hope that CFIUS will take it up.
Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, ranking member on the Financial Services Committee at today's hearing with the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen. Dr. Rochelle Walensky, Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention since January 2021, start of the Biden administration, faced a final congressional hearing today about the COVID-19 pandemic policies before she resigns at the end of the month. She testified before the House Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic about the public guidance provided, mask mandates, school closures and reopenings, and other issues. Congressman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, chairs the full Oversight and Accountability Committee. He asked Dr. Walensky about the information the public was getting and not getting on COVID-19 vaccines.
My question is, did the CDC work with private companies to influence the censorship of dissent about vaccines?
You know, that topic is one that is under litigation in the court, so I will not be speaking to that.
Recently, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg said that during the COVID-19 pandemic, the establishment kind of waffled a bunch of facts and then asked for a bunch of things to be censored that, in retrospect, ended up being more debatable or true. Did the CDC work with Meta, or I like to call it Facebook still, to censor or otherwise alter any post?
Here's what I can tell you. The most important thing that has gotten us out of this pandemic, I think, is our vaccine and how well they work and how safe they are.
I understand that.
And it was really important that the American people understand how well they worked and how safe they are.
I understand it.
But in terms of the communications, that is, again, something that I'm not going to speak to because it is currently under
So you're
court
not going to answer the question?
It is currently under court litigation.
I hear that so much on everything we do. It's currently under investigation. Did the president take a bribe? Dr. Jackson, it's currently under investigation. Did the CDC ever work with Facebook to craft internal policies on censoring posts regarding the COVID pandemic?
Again, this is something that is under court litigation. What I will say, though, it is so very important to get correct, factual information out to people to understand the overwhelming benefit of these vaccines over the very minimal risks.
What about Twitter? Can you answer that?
Again, under court
So
litigation.
you refuse to answer the question?
No, what I'm saying is it is under court litigation, and I will say that the most important thing that we were working towards at CDC is to get facts out to people so they understood in plain language what was important, which is that the
I'm going to
vaccines
reclaim my
were
time. Facebook's policy on coronavirus misinformation dated February 8th, 2021 said that it would purge, quote, false claims, including the notion that COVID-19 is man-made or manufactured. Director, did the CDC ever recommend that Facebook or other companies censor posts promoting the lab leak theory?
We're speaking to the same thing. These are all situations that are under court litigation. I will not be speaking
Did the CDC ever recommend that Facebook or other companies censor posts suggesting that vaccines did not prevent the infection or spread of COVID-19?
What was most important to CDC was to get information about how well the vaccines were working and how safe they are. And, many of the questions, all of the questions that you're asking are along the same lines. They're currently under litigation in the court.
Dr. Rochelle Walensky, director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, questioned by Congressman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, chair of the Oversight and Accountability Committee, at today's subcommittee hearing, subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. Dr. Walensky is stepping down from her position. June 30th, President Biden reportedly plans to nominate North Carolina Health Secretary Mandy Cohen to lead the CDC. That's according to the New York Times and Washington Post, citing people with direct knowledge of the pending announcement, no names given. Wall Street today, the Dow up 145, NASDAQ up 111, S&P up 30. Bloomberg reports that U.S. inflation slowed in May, supporting the case for Federal Reserve officials to pause their run of interest rate hikes this week. Both the Consumer Price Index and the core CPI, which excludes food and energy, decelerated on an annual basis, highlighting inflation's descent since peaking last year at 4% year over year. Inflation is now at its lowest level since March 2021, according to data out Tuesday from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that reporting from Bloomberg. And the U.S. Senate today advanced Jared Bernstein's nomination to be the head of the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House, the president's top economic advisor. The vote was 50-49 to end debate and move to a final vote. Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, the only Democrat joining the Republicans in opposing the Jared Bernstein nomination. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about emailed to you every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.